West moving from a balancing an intersection, an interface of global interests and national interests, we were able to create the post-World War II order. But now there is a divergence of these interests. That is what one would see as a global interest versus a national interest. And you actually really fault the Europeans on this. Talk a little about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, if you want to solve the problems of the world, they can be solved very easily. Just implement Western values. Now, let me give one simple one. The West always speaks of democracy as being the peak of human civilization. What does democracy mean? It means that each citizen has an equal stake in the society. You treat everybody equally. Now, what's happening in the world today is that in the 6.6 billion people in the world, right? In the past, it was only the West that was dynamic, energetic, effective. But that today is only 12% of the world's population. The remaining 88% of the world's population is no longer passive. It is now energetic, effective, and dynamic. And as they become more energized, the first question they ask themselves is, why is it that 12% of the world's population who live in the West control our destinies? This goes against the fundamental principle of democracy. And indeed, if you want to see it is ironic that the West is trying to perpetuate dictatorship in global institutions because it believes in the principles of, transparency, accountability, representativeness, and so on and so forth. But the last dictators in the world are the permanent members of the UN Security Council, because you cannot vote them out. They have a veto against being voted out. Now, so this is where the West is not being true to its own values in trying to cope with the New World Order. And one of the most surprising suggestions I make, for example, in the book, is that if you want to ensure a more peaceful and stable world, you want to make sure that the voices of the 88% of the world's population who live outside the West is heard by the world. And there is, fortunately, something which Paul Kennedy calls the Parliament of Man, the UN General Assembly, which can provide the opportunity for us to listen to what the voices in the world are saying. Go listen to them. So, for example, if you believe that something is a great global challenge, don't take it to the UN Security Council, which is so unrepresentative today. Take it to the General Assembly and have a debate down there. And if you get the support of the vast majority of the world's population, then you know you're doing something right. But if they don't support you, then hey, consider the possibility you're doing something fundamentally wrong. So the West has now got to be true to its own principles and listen to the voices of the majority of the world. And I think what my book tries to do is to point out what the rest of the world is beginning to think. And as I say somewhere, please treat me as an early tremor, because behind me comes a big earthquake if you don't listen to this tremor.
You go through a number of issues: proliferation, global warming, the international economy, and in all of these cases, this mass of people who were sort of excluded and their leaders have insights about particular problems. And the West is sort of shooting itself in the foot by not hearing, because in the present you could have modest change which actually might enhance our power, although there would be relative decline, and we're oblivious to that. Talk about one of these issues. I mean, even take, for example, the problem of proliferation.
Yeah. Well, the most, as you know, the two most painful chapters I have in the book for a Western reader are the chapters on de-Westernization and the chapter on Western incompetence. And this is something that's quite new, you know. It's quite amazing that on a very wide range of issues, if you look at the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, I mean, that's pure incompetence. You look at the Doha round of trade talks and the way it is going, that's also pure incompetence. You look at how the West is reacting to the challenge of global warming, also a case of pure incompetence. But the one that I fear the most, and I'm glad you mentioned it, is that the fear of proliferation of nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Indeed, one of the greatest achievements we've had in the last 40, 50 years is that we have managed to more or less hold the line on nuclear proliferation. And the reason why we were able to hold the line on nuclear proliferation is because there was a grand bargain between the 5 official nuclear weapon states, United States, Russia, China, UK and France, and the other states, that while the other states prevented themselves from going nuclear, the 5 nuclear weapon states would also reduce their nuclear arsenals and certainly not walk towards the nuclear threshold. And here, one fact that many Americans are not aware of is that one of the greatest violators of the NPT today is the United States. It has kept increasing, modernizing its nuclear arsenals. And if you have someone as influential as Donald Rumsfeld saying, "What's wrong with nuclear bunker busters?" then you're crossing the nuclear threshold you're not supposed to cross under the NPT. So clearly, something has gone wrong in the way America approaches these issues. And this is why I'm glad that this group of wise men, you know, Kissinger, Shultz, Perry, I think one more, have come out with a statement saying, please, let's find a way of putting the nuclear genie back in the bottle. It's America that has uncorked this nuclear genie, and it's up to America to put the nuclear genie back in the bottle, because it is in America's long-term national interest to prevent this kind of nuclear proliferation. And what Americans have got to understand is that the NPT is not a solitary treaty on its own. It's part of a complex fabric of multilateral organizations. The NPT is not self-enforcing. When the NPT needs to be enforced, you have to turn to the United Nations to enforce the NPT. But if America keeps attacking the United Nations, and if you keep sending an ambassador like John Bolton, who believes his job is not to strengthen the United Nations, but to weaken the United Nations, if you keep on weakening the United Nations, how can you then use it to maintain the NPT? That's an amazing, fundamental contradiction in America's policies on multilateral issues, and most Americans are not aware of it. And if you want to, and at the same time, you want to preserve the sanctity of treaties like NPT, you must become, America as a state, a role model in also respecting other treaties. Why do you walk away from CTBT, a Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty? Why do you walk away from it? You have nuclear weapons. Other states don't have nuclear weapons. The CTBT prevents them from carrying out nuclear tests. You should respect that treaty. It's in your